Welcome aboard the dopamine train, where our ADHD-powered locomotive stops at every shiny thought along the tracks. I'm Obi-Wan, and with my co-host Rome, we explore various topics and see where the conversation train takes us. Today, we will be talking about the history of social media, a subject that I am very passionate about because it affects our everyday lives, and I'm also here with Rome as the co-host.
How's it going?
It's going well. I'm very excited to get into this topic today. I learned a lot that I didn't know, in a sense. Basically, the first thing is, what is social media? And so there was two categories. When I think of social media, I think of Facebook, MySpace, Snapchat, Twitter, now known as X. Things of that sort.
MySpace, throwing it back.
Throwing it back, indeed. And there's even older ones that I forgot about until I started deep diving a bit into research. Like, fun fact, LinkedIn existed before MySpace, which I thought...
I did not know that.
Yes, LinkedIn came out in 2002 as a way for professional and career-minded folk to connect. And then 2003, MySpace came out, which I found very interesting because you'd think it would be the reverse. But if we're looking at like needs of how technology comes out, it makes sense that LinkedIn came out first prior because work is always a priority, right? In a sense. So that's what I found a little interesting.
What was the oldest? Do you know what the oldest one was that you could find?
So it depended on the definition, and that's where it got interesting to me. Is I looked at a couple sites from like Wikipedia to just like history of this sites, and there's a little bit of debate of like some people were referencing back that the telegram back in 1863 was the first form of social. I'm like, okay, communication style, sure, but like social media is not.
Bit of a stretch.
It's like how far do you want to go back in history of like, do you want to go from the beginning of time of first mention or first conversation that was electronic, or are we going back to what was like a network in a sense?
So,
and that's
someone writing on a tablet dissing someone with the @ symbol.
Right, exactly. And so I like Wikipedia's definition where it says social media are interactive technologies that facilitate the creation, sharing, and aggregation of content such as ideas, interests, and other forms of expression amongst virtual communities and networks. And to me, that makes sense. And that's where it gets into debate of is AIM, if you remember AIM, as a messenger app during...
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Is that technically a social media? And I would say based off that definition, no. Because in a sense, it was a messaging service. You could throw even like WhatsApp as that also because it's just a messaging service. And you're not sharing content to get commented on or looked at in a sense. So... to the history of the timeline of social media, the first one was called 6 Degrees. And I had never heard of 6 Degrees. And 6 Degrees was a social network website that lasted from 1997 to 2000. And it was based on a web of contacts model of social networking. It was thought of and named after the concept of 6 degrees of separation, which users would list their friends, family members, and acquaintances, whether registered on the site or not, and external contacts are invited to join. And then, in a sense, could send messages, post bulletin board items, first and second, third degrees, and see their connection. And I found this very interesting because when I think of the first social media, the first thing that comes to mind is MySpace, right? That was my first exposure to social media. I don't know if that was the same for you, Alex,
same here, basically.
Or Rome. Yeah, and so that's where I was like, okay, interesting. The other ones that I didn't think about that would fit into that category was classmates.com.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So classmates.com, I remember seeing the ads. It was a way for people to reconnect with their old high school friends. They would upload databases of old high school, I forget what they're called right now. It's the book of pictures that you would get.
The yearbook?
Yearbooks. And that's how you would connect, and actually did quite well for themselves for a bit. But this was also before MySpace, which again I found very interesting because again my brain went MySpace is the first one. And so classmates.com, they lasted for quite a bit. They have run into some controversy in terms of sharing personal data, things of that sort. But I
imagine
think
a lot of these platforms have run into that issue just by
100%.
nature of what they do.
Exactly. And we can get into the other ones that do that as well. So classmates.com, they actually kind of saw it coming back in during the pandemic because they hosted virtual reunions on the site. And so that was one kind of slice of the pie of how they interacted. And then we have what we both thought was the first social media as MySpace. Now, MySpace is a very interesting just site in general of how it worked, what it was, what it became, and what it tried to do in a sense. What I liked about MySpace is that you had always your first friend was the founder, Tom Anderson.
Mm-hmm. I remember.
Who was always your first friend. And as like an 8th grader that should have not been on this site probably and committed fraud and said I was 18. I was like, who is Tom? And you'd have these 5 top friends. So you would have your list of friends and then you'd have your top 5. And that was always like amongst my social group, a point of contention of like, who's in your top 5? And it always, for my sanity purpose, would always put Tom as a fill-in, because why wouldn't you want the founder of MySpace to be your top 5 friends? I think there was a lot more versus like now versus then is there was a lot more personalization avenues for MySpace versus the other ones.
Oh, for sure. I just remember that you could change the color of the entire almost like you could create your own website. You could add music if you wanted to. Like people would launch the page and just get blasted with whatever theme song that you had at the time. Did you play music on your MySpace?
Yes, I did. I don't remember what music I played, but I remember that being a big thing. Is like you could turn the option of like, do you want users to auto play your music? And it was always yes. And sometimes now, like thinking back, it's kind of like when somebody's watching a video online and or on their phone and they forget that they have the volume all the way up and it just is super loud. That is basically the first instance of that, because you were probably in a computer lab, not supposed to be on that. The person who was on IT did a horrible job on that firewall, allowing you to have access to that site. And then you're supposed to be working on like your endangered species project, but instead you're on Facebook, and all of a sudden, or not Facebook, MySpace, and all of a sudden loud, what is it? Viva La Vida from Coldplay turns on or something of the sort.
I feel like you're describing a situation that actually happened, because an endangered species project is oddly specific.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I remember doing I think it was in 7th grade, a endangered species project in the computer lab. And my choice was rhinos. And that's where my love for rhinos started, and how as a society, as basically humans, we're just destroying the species just because we're humans in a sense. It's kind of messed up. But yeah, that was back in 8th grade, and the rest was just 100% fiction.
So how active? Because I know that you, I don't see you on social media very much. Granted, I'm not really on it too much either. But were you more active back when MySpace was a thing?
I would make, fake profiles in a sense. And you're like, what do you mean? Because you could customize your site, what I would do is I made a Batman one where it was like Bruce Wayne Batman.
I'm
And I would
literally
just
Batman.
literally Batman, and I would just put it out. I would also, I think at the time that's when The Dark Knight came out. I think that was in 2008. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, on that.
That's right. 2008 is, I remember off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure that's when Dark Knight came out.
Or it wasn't called The Dark Knight, but I forget what the first iteration
Batman Begins.
Batman Begins, yes, for Christopher Nolan. And so
Okay, now I'm not sure anymore because I thought that
I'm
was
not
the
sure
Dark
anymore
Knight.
either. But anyway, getting back to, I would build out this site just like I was Batman. And then the other one I did was Spider-Man, and that was a lot of fun. And then you'd have some people like try to interact with the site, and that was always interesting to me.
So
And
you're
then
just creating this superhero universe through MySpace?
Exactly. Well, there was another one that to me was quite famous. Was somebody was Jesus, and it was the statue of Jesus going like with the thumbs up, like the Fonz
meme
from Happy Days. Yep,
Yeah.
that was the profile picture, and yeah, that was a good time. Like making, I liked the customization of the site. I don't know if other social media sites have done that. It's very standard now.
I think you're losing more and more of it well, it's just kind of a trend across different types of products where the companies don't want you to have as much ability to customize for a plethora of reasons. One of them being like I'm sure we could go on a whole tangent talking about the car industry and how engines have been made to become obsolete sooner, or light bulbs were developed so that they would burn out so that they could maintain their business. With Apple, you used to be able to crack open a Mac and replace RAM or increase storage, and everything is just kind of soldered on now so that you can't customize it as easily. And if you look at something like Facebook or Instagram, there's basically zero customization. It's just the platform, and you can upload what you want to it, and that's about it.
Do you think it's kind of, now thinking about it, I was talking about it with my friend this morning at a diner, when we were talking about how modern architecture is actually the worst for sound and noise, actually. And so it sounds like, in a sense, like this modern way of doing the site, and the only thing that you're customizing is really the picture that you're posting and maybe your name, right? Is that actually making stuff less artistic?
It's worth thinking about. I would say the reason mainly they don't allow it is probably because it gets a lot of people away from tech support. The more customization you offer to the average person, the more likely they are to break it. And you would probably need a team and a budget dedicated just to maintaining those options that allow you to change the look of the headers and everything like that. If you're on I don't know how hard that actually is, but if you're on a persistent live service like that, then it's just another thing that they have to worry about that they don't want to, I think.
Interesting. Never thought of it that way, but it sadly it always comes down to money or employing someone to do it, right?
Yeah.
And
employing as few people as possible.
Right. The other thing that I found out about MySpace is I did not realize that at one point Justin Timberlake purchased the company.
Yeah, he was trying to. I was going to make a joke at the beginning. It was like, oh yeah, MySpace. That's the thing that Justin Timberlake invented. He claimed he was going to sort of turn it around and make it into a newfangled platform, but I don't think that really came to fruition.
I would say nay on that. The other one that I think it came out when we were in high school, was Google Plus.
Oh, Jesus.
Remember that nonsense?
I almost forgot, and then you reminded me.
I almost forgot. That synapse was almost cut from Alex's,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden was brought back, and now it's myelinated track, so it's forever now for the next at least 5-ish years going to be in his brain for memory.
Yeah. If I go back and scroll through enough TikTok, I might be able to accelerate the process, but no guarantees.
That's funny.
So Google Plus, what did your research churn out on that?
It was Google's attempt to enter the social media world, and it just wasn't, in a sense, how do I put this in the kindest of terms? It simply flopped. At the time, they were trying to compete with Facebook. Facebook was the big boy on the street, in a sense of back in 2011, 2012, Facebook was the place to be. And so Google tried to enter that space in that market. And then the problem was they came into a rocky existence, in a sense, up until like 2018, where 500,000 Google users information got compromised due to a hack, and then they closed the site immediately after. So
that's a little shocking that one of the biggest data aggregators, like a platform that everyone uses for the most part, is not able to pull off something like Facebook. And maybe it had something to do with who got there first and who established themselves first, so it made it harder for Google to come up. But that does actually kind of surprise me. I remember setting up my Google Plus profile at the time, and it just it seemed kind of utilitarian. It wasn't very exciting, or if we're looking at the spectrum of website customizability, you'd have MySpace on one end because you could add music, change colors, and all that stuff. I feel like Google Plus was on the opposite end, like even less customizable than Facebook.
No, 100%. They were trying to it's kind of like the classic case of they tried to copy something but didn't make it better. They just copied it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of circles were your thing. Like, you could have multiple circles, and that was very confusing to me still to this day.
I remember that was confusing for me as well.
Because the whole concept was like, oh, this is your circle, but then there's like this Venn diagram thing going in the back, but you didn't really get a visualization of it. It was just like, oh, this person's in this circle who was also in this circle. I'm like, because it was going off like the fact of like circle of friends, which is cool, but I was like, this wasn't it for me. So yeah, that was...
I bet Google's punching air right now thinking, man, we aggregate so much data nowadays. Imagine how much more we would have gotten if our social media had taken off.
Right, exactly. And then you have Facebook comes on the scene at 2004, along with Twitter in 2006, those bigger names. And Reddit also comes on the scene at 2005, which I did not know. I thought it was a newer social media. And so Facebook, founded by Mark Zuckerberg, that big old boy with the kind of interesting face that gets criticized a lot, just for existing. Is he a reptile? Who knows?
Those are the real questions right there.
Those are the real questions, right?
Do you ever use Twitter?
I never used Twitter or X ever. I thought it was the silliest of things, because at the time when it first came out, I was like, oh, you can post a status. It was like little micro blogging. And I was like, cool, but Facebook's does the thing of like you can post a status and people look and people comment and do the thing. Plus
Right.
more. And that's why Twitter, I think I made one for a hot second. Then it got hijacked because of poor password protection. And then I
Whoops.
actually ended up having to delete it like about, I'd say about four. I keep thinking it's 2020, but it's not. Is the problem. So I was like 4 years. I was like, wait, more. More like
Are-
8 years ago.
Are we still in, like, can I technically say I'm 4 years younger because 2020 doesn't count, or are we past that phase yet?
I have no idea. It's kind of like I saw I had a student share a site with me where it was like, oh, in COVID time. And so it's a site, it's a very silly site. It's kind of like it gives me the vibe of the US debt clock site
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like a counter and nothing else on the page. So, and it just puts it in, let me see if I can find it real quick.
I mean,
It put-
I'm happy because it means that I'll perpetually always be in my 20s. So
Right. COVID time clock. I wonder. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
it's a time clock that doesn't keep track of anything other than the
It just
time.
basically says 100 plus days after, like, COVID.
Oh, so you could just subtract whatever the amount of time is and go,
Yep,
yeah, I'm
yep.
still that age.
Right. Yeah. It was quite interesting. What
Going
else-
back to
Yeah.
Twitter for a second.
Yeah.
I never, I would say that's probably my least used platform aside from the ones that I just don't know about and have never used. And it, it's really grown a lot in terms of how many people are on there and how much information is accessible that you can share. But one thing that's just never changed, while you can find little bits of wisdom here and there, like I have some tweets that are saved because I just like, wow, it's a real zinger. That's a great one. Good to go back and read once in a while. I just feel like it has espoused so much absolute nonsense and non-interaction. I mean, the fact that you can take some of the smartest people out there, like professionals in their field and intellectuals, and somehow turn them into monkeys throwing poop at each other online in short phrases is just, I mean, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. But it's also just so unfortunate because you can't really get to know someone. Like, for example, sometimes my mom, if she doesn't know about someone who I've like started following or listening to, she'll go and look them up on Twitter, which if they're active, it's great. You can find a lot of info, but then you don't really hear the person's voice. You don't know how they truly feel about things because they're just writing these short blurbs that are usually reactionary to something else that's happening, or they're retweeting something. And I don't know. I just feel like it's one of the platforms that, while it is useful for quick communication and I guess getting news and getting everyone on the same page, it's just like a net negative for human interaction and how people conduct themselves on that platform. Like the most vile things people have ever said on social media, I feel like come out of Twitter. So that's just my quick editorializing I wanted to share.
Just like pure sludge and garbage.
Yeah, I mean, if TikTok and Reels and all that stuff have visual sludge set to someone talking, Twitter is just the text. It's just people like literally screaming into the abyss. Like they can't afford therapy, so whatever stranger next to me is gonna be my punching bag, my little pin cushion for the next 5 minutes while I vent.
Oh my god. There's a lot to unpack there. I think
Yeah.
the first thing would be life cannot be summed up in 2 sentences. 2, just for our audience's purpose, can you define for our audience what sludge is?
So sludge, to my understanding, is it's usually in the context of shorts or TikToks. It's when you have a topic or an idea that you're trying to share with an audience, but because their attention spans are so short and retention is so important for the success of your clip, you actually put unrelated video footage in the video so that they can watch that while they listen to what you're saying. So an example of this would be, I'm talking about the importance of getting 8 hours of sleep. And while I'm saying that, you're watching Temple Run play in the background, or you're looking at someone playing Minecraft parkour and jumping between blocks, because those things are visually stimulating, so you have a higher chance of staying and watching the video. It's sludge content.
Interesting.
So
makes sense.
So Twitter, and then what was there another one that you'd moved on to?
I said Twitter. I said Reddit.
Okay, now on the opposite of the spectrum, Reddit, that might just qualify as a YouTube University alternative contender. It's like the text version of YouTube University, for me at least.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll get so Reddit for our viewers, for our listeners who don't know what Reddit is. Reddit is basically, I would consider it a blog site, but for the most part is honest, or has that reputation of being honest, and even sometimes, even from who I've talked to, more reputable source of information than the actual news. And
I could second that.
Again, which is very intriguing to me, because it's very bottom up versus curated news site. Now, they came about 2005. I didn't realize it was that early. And so basically what, as they're described, is an American social news aggregate web content rating discussion website, which I think pretty much sums it up. But I will say it also leads to where I think a lot of social media dangers are, where you're having an audience and people saying yes to conspiracy theory sometimes is the problem. That's where I was like, you got to be a little bit hesitant, but that's just me.
You're saying Reddit is a place where conspiracy theories develop?
I'm saying that in general is where I could see it happening. I don't have any actual evidence to support that. So, I mean, it's strictly opinion, but it's the classic with any computer site where you have, I look up one thing and I get pushed due to ad tracking cookies, many other things supposedly like this. So for instance, if I look up an instance of a gun or a rifle or a handgun, I will immediately get from YouTube, from Facebook, from anywhere, ads that tend to be right-winged, regardless if I even believe that or not.
I definitely get that on YouTube.
And so that's where I'm saying that, yes, it's great in terms of learning content and new things. Wonderful site. But also, got to be conscious of the cookies and have that critical thinking cap of like, why is this happening? So that's my 2 cents on that. So we talked about Reddit. Instagram comes out in 2010. I think Instagram's pretty self-explanatory, but for the sake of the audience, we'll explain. It was kind of like...
Has our audience never been on the internet except for our podcast?
I have no idea. I just don't...
They're listening to us. What is Reddit?
What is Reddit? Well, it's just one of those things where, are we assuming that you know? Or are we
No,
Just
I think that the fact you're explaining it is good. I'm just causing problems.
no, it's a good time. I get it. So you have Instagram launches in 2010. What's interesting is if we're looking at like visual sites, is Tumblr comes out in 2007. So Tumblr
That was in 2007?
Yes. So 2007 was Tumblr. And then you have so this is what I learned from looking at this timeline of when things were launching, is that just because it launched does not mean it was popular. Because Tumblr to me was popular in the 2010s, right?
I agree.
Versus Instagram was popular at that same time because it launched at that time.
Did you have a Tumblr?
I did not have a Tumblr. But Tumblr was an interesting site because you had it was the thought process for Tumblr was pictures to me, and then also blogging.
It was
Well,
like
I think
Twitter and Instagram combined, I guess.
but technically not Instagram combined because Tumblr was first.
But, oh, yeah, yeah.
So
But in my head canon of it coming out after Instagram.
yeah. Exactly. And so I just remember Tumblr, that's where a lot of this might be a little too much information. I just remember that they had different settings for what pictures were allowed, and some folk would use it to look at some fun pictures on there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
And for those who don't know, I am not explaining that. You can do your own extrapolations of what I mean by that. Then we have Instagram. Instagram changes how photo and video sharing worked in a sense. I think they were the biggest person, or not person, but like site that really pushed that forward. And it even did it so well that Facebook bought them. And I forget even for how much. I still have an Instagram, never really have used it. I've posted a couple scenic pictures on there personally. I know it's very powerful in the sense of like telling the story via imaging, but beyond that, just not really familiar with it. I don't know if you can share your stuff, Rome, in terms
Oh
of
yeah,
that.
for sure. Well, first off, the fact that in all the time you've had it, you've only posted a couple scenic pictures. Those must have been some insanely good scenic pictures for you to go, you know what? This deserves to be on the gram.
That's very true.
I will say Instagram is probably the most used platform I've had. I got started on it, I want to say in 2012, so around the time I was starting college. I'm trying to remember what my first picture was. I know the first couple were like some parkour things, and I went on a camping trip, and I had a really bad sunburn, so I posted a picture from that and like some pictures of my cats at the time. But I was just screwing around. I didn't anticipate it to become the business tool that it's become now, or how significant of an impact it has on people's psyche, including my own, because Facebook was very much it was culturally developed as a place where people could rant about their extreme political views, and they could share some memes here and there or some fake videos that popped up across their feed. And I think in general it caters to an older demographic at this point, because in my years as a teacher, any student who I mention Facebook to, whether they're super young or they're a little bit older, like 18, 19, 20, they all look at me like, you use Facebook? What are you, 100 years old? And so I thought that was really interesting. And ironically, so that's a common sentiment in the US, but as far as I don't know if how accurate these numbers are now, but last I checked, Facebook is the most or one of the most used social media platforms worldwide. So you'll have a high demographic of young people that are on Facebook, but they usually are in other countries, kind of in the same parallel as how WhatsApp is not super popular in the US. We prefer iMessage here because everyone has iPhones, so that's our data messenger of choice. But in other parts of the world where phone plans were not as easily accessible, WhatsApp came into the picture. And talk about companies that Meta or Facebook bought. That's another one. So, but going back to Instagram, it was a lot simpler at the time, and it was aesthetically pleasing because all you had to do was upload a photo and it would come out in a grid format, which was nice to look at. And that definitely encouraged a lot of people to share their photography. So I think that competitive aspect of business building started to become a thing as Instagram developed. And I think that was the initial thought that led to the whole influencer market that we have now that's become just massive. But Instagram back then didn't really have an algorithm. It didn't have you weren't being served all sorts of different types of artists. In fact, one of the old jokes, dude, this would not land anymore with anyone unless they used Facebook back in the day, was how much does a hipster weigh on Instagram? Because at the time, Instagram was considered like kind of a fringe platform where it was just catering to photographers. You know,
Yep.
Now you look at it as really the primary platform of whatever you share, right? Because even if you're not posting photos or reels, if you want to share text, people just make graphics now where you scroll through and you look at graphic design elements posted to Instagram because it has so much reach and it's become a powerful business tool. I know not everyone uses it for business, but I would say if you walked into a workshop right now for actors talking about how you need to be engaging on social media, the first thing they would say is you need to be on Instagram. It's sort of your business card. And I know other actors who have actually gotten work through Instagram, through a DM or something like that. Legitimate work too. There's a lot of scams out there, but it is a legit thing where you can be employed based on what you share. And I think if you're someone who works in a space, especially like some of the accounts I follow are the 3D design ones where they'll make the back rooms or they'll make some sort of liminal space in this 3D generated environment, and being able to share those in a portfolio, I think is really great for those artists to get their work out there and hopefully get employed. But I haven't even touched on the avenue that's I think really damaging about Instagram is I think that was the platform that sort of trained my brain to equate self-worth to likes or that counter. And so then you get into the slippery slope of comparing with your peers, like who's getting more likes, who's getting more comments. And this is amplified by the fact that now other accounts that you don't follow are being shared to you based on their engagement. And so you start to ask yourself, how come I can't? It doesn't seem like I can average anywhere near that. And granted, there's so many people, like there are far more people that are in your same boat than there are people that are successful, but you're not
Correct.
seeing any of those guys. You're just seeing the successful ones. And when your close circle of friends is also doing better than you numbers wise on average, that can start to get into your head a little bit. And then you spend more time on the platform, you try to share more content, and then that dopamine hit of seeing the little notifications pop up start to affect you more, and you're like, well, I gotta keep sharing so I can keep getting that dopamine hit. They really narrowed down the circuitry, that addiction utilizes. And it's made these social media companies a lot of money. This I kind of a rant or a ramble there, but that is my experience with Instagram. I've had it longer than anything else, and it was the first thing I needed to delete when I got off of social media, because that was the type of platform where if I wasn't doing anything in that moment, my hand would just instinctively pull up the app with no I can't
Prompt.
think of it. Yes, thank you. It's completely unprompted. It would just happen. And I'd be like, "Oh, why have I now watched 8 stories?" It's like you're like a robot who suddenly has a moment of consciousness again. Like, "Oh my god, I just scrolled through this profile."
I think that happens to everyone. Meaning, I don't think that's like, I think that's a normal for people now, sadly, if you think about it really deeply, right? Is if you are in line for something, whatever it may be, retail, fast food, whatever, 9 times out of 10, there's at least one person on their phone waiting and scrolling through whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, we'll just follow this train a little bit of being okay with boredom, being okay with not having something to do is, I think, a very much lost skill for a variety of reasons.
Amen.
Because think of it this way, where your hand would find it the way you described it. I was like, man, we did this already twice today. And so that's what I was like, you're not wrong. And it comes off as a very normal thing, but it's kind of a little bit sinister if you really think about it, that you have this thing that's really grabbing your attention and it's not really serving you. Like, what is serving you in that moment to watch whatever media? Is it informative? Maybe. Is it funny? Sure. So we have a quick laugh, but we're getting a quick laugh right here just via talking. Or like asking those deeper questions of like the why. Why am I doing this? What is this doing to serve me? And I don't think those conversations are had because your thumb is scrolling through 7 videos already. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Actually, yeah, you just gave me a thought based on that. So I think it has to do with, I'll call it the point system. So Jesse kind of reminded me of this. So we would play Fortnite sometimes, right? And I come from
Bless
the back.
I hate that game.
I'm not a huge fan of it either, but sometimes just to get on with friends.
Right.
I come from the background of, I just enjoy gaming for the sake of gaming, and I'm more than happy to play a custom game. In fact, I prefer to play a custom game with friends. So my ideal scenario looks like this. If we have 10 people that where I know all of them and I can get them in the same lobby or the same room and we just play against each other, that to me is my perfect gaming session. Now, the thing about that, and the reason why most people would probably not agree with it, is because, well, when you play a custom game, nothing is being tracked, right? You're not ranking up, you're not gaining XP, you're not gaining currency. And so it doesn't feel as legit as, we'll say, matchmaking, right? Where
Sure.
you're playing the standard version of the game that is giving you all the rewards that you could typically expect. And for good reason. You know, in a custom game, like, people could cheese around, like they could be cheating, not like using cheats, but just cheating because they're playing with their friends and stuff like that. So they wouldn't, you can't give people rewards based on that. But I don't care about getting those other things. I just care about the enjoyment of the experience of playing the game and being with people that I want to be in the presence of. And so one day I remember I said, hey, you know, can we just hop on and play a custom game? Or, you know, Fortnite is great with all its little, what would you call it? They have their
Unreal
custom
Engine.
game matchmaking thing. So like other people,
that's cool.
it's kind of like Roblox. Like, people make their own games and you can jump in and play. But again, you're not accumulating anything for this because they're user generated. It's not like playing the default battle royale. I said,
Right.
hey, can we do that? And he goes, I prefer to just play the regular game mode. And I go, oh, this is interesting, because now it's become, and I've heard this from a couple people at this point, I am more concerned about getting the points, getting the renown, getting the rank up than I am about just enjoying the game. And this is related to Instagram because we've developed this mindset that, okay, I'm not really having a conversation with you right now unless we're sharing it, unless we're posting it. Like, the game has become hitting the post button. And so everything you do is only valid. It's only, it should only be done based on whether or not it can be put in a format where you can show it online, so that you can get the EXP or the engagement of that like number, or those comments, or, you know, that maybe there's a new feature, like, okay, a few years back you could add music to your Instagram photos. Like, okay, I need to come up with some good photos so I can add music to them. And so I can't just go out and hang out with a friend and have it be that and not have it recorded. Otherwise it doesn't, quote unquote, count. If that makes sense.
No, you're touching on a lot in a sense. Like, I was trying to see where you're going with it, and I finally get it. It's the fact of doing the thing for the sake of the thing, not expecting anything out of it. Kind of like a selfless act in a sense, right? We're playing the game. I don't need experience because I'm here with said person playing the game, and that's what matters. Versus, oh, I'm playing a standard game so I can get the XP, which is fine. But also, like, does the XP matter that much? Does that like matter that much? And I think we've really lost in society.
It feels like it does. It's gotten to a point where it feels like it's really tangible. Like, you're losing real value if you're not getting it. That's the convincing part, I think.
Like, I guess, what's the loss of that? Like, oh, because you paid $60 for the game, and then you got to use the battle pass, and I got to fill out the battle pass so I get my money's worth. Is that what you're getting at?
That partially, and also the using the likes example. That's a universal social currency. Like, everyone understands what that is, and everyone has that same rule set applied to their own profile. It's not, it's not some arbitrary thing that I came up with and am gauging my own progress on a platform based on how I feel. It is a universal rule that is easy to understand and everyone can agree upon. And it's based on the same rules that we as a society have developed for ourselves, ephemerally beforehand, right? Like none of this stuff was documented, but now we found a way to monetize or to document the things that humans naturally gravitate towards. So it becomes the official thing that quote unquote matters.
Matters because it makes generates money, is what you're arguing.
Well, it matters because I think that the value of that number is going to affect my social status in the perspective of my peers.
I see. So it's kind of like being popular amongst your friends, not only in the real world, but the social media is reflection of the real world, is what you're saying, or the thought becomes that. At least
we figured out how to objectify popularity contests. That's we've gone from wow, that he seems like he has a lot of friends to, well, I can tell you how many likes he got.
Interesting. And I guess like I'm always skeptical of generalizations, as you know, Rome. And so that's where it's like, yes, but then it's kind of gets back to who is chosen and why, right? And I know we've had discussions on offline of what kind of podcast we've wanted to create. And my thing was, I don't want to interview celebrities in a sense, because I want my podcast to be talking with regular people that I know in actual real life, or who are just regular people and are necessarily not chosen by either likes, marketing, or simply popularity. And so it's kind of like getting at that in a sense of, why are those chosen versus not chosen? Is it because of what deals they made? And it kind of gets into a little bit like how people end up in politics and get like the general consensus is, if you are running for president, you made a deal with someone to get there. I think that's a general, anyone could agree with that statement. And so getting to the social media part and what you're talking about is, how are some chosen and some not? Why does social currency matter in that sense? Because does it determine greatness in a sense, is what you're getting at, I'm assuming.
Well, it on its own does not determine greatness. I mean, I think that it can open. It depends. Like, if the numerical value is actually congruent with how people feel in real life, then sure, it can open up opportunities. Because I mean, we could have a whole podcast talking about things like the halo effect or pretty privilege, where people who are attractive tend to be more successful just because people give them the benefit of the doubt, or they immediately assume positive attributes about an attractive person versus negative. So you could make the argument that sometimes they'll do better just because of their, something that they have no control over.
That's actually proven, I would say. I can think of one election in particular, and this is where the ADHD comes in, is the election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, where for the first time you had televised debates where, in terms of knowledge of the job and the policy, Nixon was king. But because it was televised, John F. Kennedy was a lot better looking than Richard Nixon.
Rock star, man.
Rock star, and also look at his first lady in a sense too. A lot of people would say first lady was the prettiest ever. There's been those arguments as well. And so that is a contributing factor of why John F. Kennedy won the election in a sense versus Nixon, because Nixon ran 3 times.
Yeah, I think being able to appeal to the visual stimuli for people is really effective. I mean, it just makes me think of the green versus blue bubbles. There are actual benefits to having two iPhones. Like outside of that, you get end-to-end encryption. You get you don't use your text messaging service. You can share things more effectively. Like you get full resolution. There's actual benefits to using something like iMessage, but everything I just said is not what most people know about it. They prefer it because the blue messages are better. That's it. That's all you need to convince them of, and they'll use it. They'll start. Kids will bully each other in school over it, and people will say, "Hey, what the hell? What's wrong with your phone? Why are you getting green? Why am I getting green bubbles now?"
Oh my! Can you explain what you mean by that? Is it because of the text messages are colored green versus blue now, or something?
Yeah. So you know how if you have an iPhone and you message another iPhone, those messages are blue. They're blue bubbles, which means they're iMessages and they have all those features I mentioned. But green messages are between Android and iPhone. They're standard SMS messages.
How sinister.
It's really ingenious when you think about it, but yeah, it is also like at the expense of so many people, because you're like, I've seen articles that say, certain women won't go on dates if they see the guy has green bubbles in his messages. God. I don't know how true that is. That might be going to an extreme, but I've heard that, and I've heard about the bullying. Like if a kid has an Android and his texts are green, like group chatting, it's gotten better between the two, but if you've got 5 people on iMessage, you get all your group chat features, and then you add one person on Android, and they had to screw it up for the rest of the group. It's all done by design.
You used to bully me about not having an iPhone, and I was like, I don't want an iPhone because I don't believe in Apple.
Yeah, well, because I drank the Kool-Aid. They had me convinced.
Because I was like,
also I was in high school, but
yeah, I was always like, why would I understand the benefit of buying into the Apple ecosystem because it's great going from one, it's seamless. But I've always been a person of, I think there are companies out there that could build better hardware than Apple and do it better if they just let their software. Like, I'd be all for Apple if they just let their software be used outside of their own ecosystem, meaning operating system. Yeah. And it's even, and what's hilarious is the RAM in the iPhone is made by Samsung anyway. That's what I find the most humorous.
I don't think they would ever go for that, though. They've got, there are some benefits to having a closed ecosystem, and that you can, think of what a nightmare Android has to put up with, having to try to offer an operating system that supports all these different kinds of devices, like low spec hardware Linux. And then high spec hardware. Right. Well, the beauty of Linux is you can get, you could make Linux from scratch if you're a psychopath, or you just get something that's easy to install like Mint, or you get something lightweight like XFCE. Mm-hmm. You get all kinds of options with Linux, where it's kind of the reverse with Android. It's like one operating system forever. Well, that's not true. There used to be different flavors of Android. I don't know how true that is anymore, but Android 14 is what I have, and I assume that is the standard Android latest operating system that all the devices would use. But it's like some hardware can't support Android 14, so that's not going to work.
Right. We are reaching that time a little bit, and I just wanted to say, I think what we can do for our next episode possibly is kind of talk about this halo effect in terms of social. I'd like to do another part series because we didn't really touch on the one thing about the YouTube University.
For sure.
And then I wanted to get into a little bit of propaganda in social media, because I think it's an interesting take, especially with the current election going on and the players in that election.
That's a good
where
one.
You had different people leaving platforms to start their own platforms to do the thing, because they
Do
got
it.
banned.
And we haven't even gotten to that either. Like there are so many platforms now that you could choose from. There's people who are trying to get away from Google, so they're making their own YouTube alternatives. There's
It's like the Christian church.
third party API. Yeah, actually that's a good example.
It's like the Christian church. You know, we don't believe in Jesus that kind of way, so we're gonna screw your church and we're gonna make our own church.
Or I had some issue of infidelity or problems in my marriage, so we're gonna make an entire new denomination that just kind of skirts around that rule set I'm having trouble with.
Like Church of England.
Yeah. Yep.
I wasn't getting any male heirs up in here. I wasn't getting the attention I needed on Twitter. So I'm going to make my own site.
It's time for Periscope.
Called Truth Social.
Yeah.
God. So I think that'd be good starts for our next episodes. For our final words, what we talked about today was like history of social media, just kind of bare bones, and getting a little bit into the dangers of it. It seems like we're always talking about the dangers of technology. Maybe we're just very much
I love technology. I mean, I think I'm in a stage right now where I've been talking about Instagram in a negative light just because if you asked me like 2 years ago, I'd be like, oh, dude, it's great. Like I'd share all these things, talk to all these people on there. It's not all bad. They're tools at the end of the day. The platforms themselves are not necessarily bad. It's how you use them, how most people tend to use them, and the type of interactions that they usually cultivate. So,
right. And then we talked about how life can't be summed up in 2 sentences, and how, in a sense, the theme was just because it existed doesn't mean it was its time to rise. We mentioned that with Tumblr and Instagram. We found out where Tumblr was on the scene way before Instagram, even like 3 years earlier, but had a peak at around the same time. And so if there's anything you guys want to hear from us, this is a variety show of where we're just following where the conversation goes and that dopamine. Just let us know. How about Rome, you outro us this time?
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. This was Obi-Wan and I discussing social media, and then following up with some Halo Effect and YouTube later on. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for your support.